Good morning, students. So today I am going to present you a lecture on the topic that is creating tables in MySQL. Now you remember in one of my earlier presentation I have shown you how to create a database in MySQL, and here is the statement that creates a database specified by the name college using the proper syntax. The phrase "if not exist" in this statement is very important. This checks whether the database specified by the name college has been created before or not. In case this database specified by the name college has already been created before, then this statement won't be able to create this database named college again. But if it has not been created before, then this database specified by the name college shall be created as a new database. And once you have created the database using the statement that is create database if not exist, then providing the name of the database followed by semicolon, you should then be able to add tables into the database. Now coming back to our presentation, I shall now show you how to create tables in MySQL. Once a database has been created and the structure of the table has been finalized, individual tables can be created by choosing proper column names and data types. Following is the syntax of creating a table in a MySQL database. The syntax starts with the keyword create table followed by the name of the table that you have to specify here. Then come below, you have the body of the table for which you have to specify the column names along with their data types. The body of the table is enclosed between the opening brace, that is this one, and the closing brace, which is this one, and this section comprises the body of the table. Now we shall define the name of the columns along with their data type in the body of the table. You can add many columns into a table. Now if this is the first column with a particular data type, and if this is the second column with a particular data type, then the rest of the columns I have denoted with this ... That means you can specify as many columns as you like for a table, but every column have to have a particular data type. That means every column inside a table is identified by its column name, and then it is associated with a particular data type. So we can say that columns make up a table, and a table cannot exist without any columns. Now the type of values that a particular column shall hold shall be defined by its data type. These were the list of data types that I have explained you in my earlier presentation. Okay, these were the list of data types. Say for example, if the data type that you specify is tiny int or medium int or big int or integer, then the column can hold only integer values. Or else if the data type that you specify is float or double or decimal, then the column can hold only decimal values. And once you have defined the column names and its associated data type for a table, then you can give these column options and the constraint list, and at the end the table options. These stuffs, that is column options, constraint list and the table options, are optional. They are not mandatory for a table, and I will be explaining you about these optional stuffs in one of my later presentations. But keep in mind that you have to define the column names and its associated data type for a table, because columns make up a table, and that's why this part, that is column name and data type, is mandatory for a table. And once you have defined the columns for a table, close the structure of the table with a closing brace by ending with a semicolon. Now take the case of this example. This statement creates a table specified by the name device, and this table has a body which is represented by the opening brace and the closing brace, and inside the body of this table named device there are 4 columns specified by the names did of data type varchar, dname of data type varchar, dcost of data type decimal, and dprofit of data type integer. Now for the first column, did of this table device, the data type varchar has a size, and the size is 6. That means the column did can hold values which shall not exceed more than 6 characters. Say for example, if you supply a value for the column named did as rtyui, then how many characters does this value contain? You count. It contains r for 1, t for 2, y for 3, u for 4, and I for 5. So in total this value contains 5 characters, and since the maximum allowed limit is 6, that's why this is acceptable. It's an acceptable value for the column did. But in case you increase the size to, say, by adding 2 more characters, it comes to 1 2 3 4 5 6 7. So you have increased the size to 7 characters. Now that the maximum allowed limit is 6 and 7 crosses this mark, that's why this will not be an acceptable value for the column named did. So make sure to supply those values for a column of a table whose size is either equal to or less than the size limit as defined for a data type in the table. Now if you remove 1 character, that is p, the total number of characters for this value comes to 6, and since the maximum allowed limit is 6, so this is again acceptable. Okay, so I hope you understood. Now let me remove this. This was just for you to understand. Now note one thing, that the data type varchar can accept characters such as letters, digits, special characters of type $, hash symbol, question mark, etc. Now come to the next column name, that is dname. Its type is also varchar, but the size defined is 10. That means, say if you supply the value for this column dname as Tom, then how many characters does this value Tom contain? It consists of 3 characters, and since the maximum allowed limit is 10, so this value will be an acceptable value for this column dname. and say if you wish to extend the number of characters by including the surname, say Cruz. Now see how many letters does this value Tom Cruise contain. It consists of 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9. So in total it consists of 9 letters. But see, in between Tom and Cruise there is a space. You have to count that space also, because in even space is taken as a character. Now this value Tom Cruise consists of the first name Tom, the surname Cruz, and in between the first name Tom and the surname Cruz there is a space, and this space is also taken as a character. So in total, can you count how many characters does this value Tom Cruise contain? If you count, the first name Tom contains 3 characters. The surname Cruz contains how many characters? You count 1 2 3 4 5 6. It contains 6 characters. So 6 plus 3 comes to 9. And as you know that in between the first name Tom and the surname Cruz there is a space, and for space there is one more character. So 3 plus 6 plus 1 comes to how much? 10. So in total this value Tom Cruise contains 10 characters. And since the maximum allowed limit for this data type is 10, so writing Tom Cruise will be an acceptable value for the column dname. But you cannot add an extra character, say F, Z, then it comes to around 12 characters, and since 12 exceeds this maximum set limit which is 10, so this will not be an acceptable value for the column dname. So make sure to provide the total number of characters for the value of a column as specified for a data type. And yes, it can be less than the set limit as defined for a data type, but it cannot be more than the set limit. So if you reduce the number of characters for this value, then this will be acceptable, as it now contains how many characters? 3 for Tom, 5 for Chris, so it comes to 8, then including the white space it comes to 9. And if you reduce one more character it comes to 8, reducing one more it comes to 7, so like that, and these will all be an acceptable value for the column dname. Now let me remove this. It was just for you to understand. Now come to the third column for this table named device. The name of that column is dcost and its data type is decimal, where it contains the precision as 8 and the scale as 2. Now since the first value, that is 8, denotes the precision, that means whenever you supply a decimal value for this column dcost, before the decimal you should put digits in such a way that it should not cross 8. That means if you supply a decimal value for the column dcost, the total number of digits for that value before the decimal point should not exceed 8. It can be either equal to 8 or less than 8, but it should not exceed 8. Now after that, the second value 2 is the scale. That means after the decimal point, the total number of digits for that value should not exceed 2. It can be either 2 or less than that, but it cannot exceed 2. Say for example, if you supply a decimal value for the column called dcost of this stable device as 1200.00, that means before the decimal for this value 1200.00, the total number of digits is 4, as 1200 comprises of 4 digits. Now as the maximum set limit for the precision is 8, so the value before the decimal, which is 1200, will be an acceptable value. And again you see, just after the decimal, 2 zeros have been included. Now as the second value for the data type decimal is 2, that means the scale is 2, which means that just after the decimal, the maximum allowed limit for the scale is 2. That means it should not contain the extra digits. So if you include, say, one more zero, then just after the decimal point you have how many digits? 3 digits. But the maximum allowed limit here is 2, as defined for this data type decimal. So this will not be an acceptable value now. But in case you remove one of the zeros, then just after the decimal point you have how many digits? 2 digits. Now since 2 is the maximum allowed limit, so this will now be an acceptable value. Again, if you remove one more digits, just after the decimal you have how many digits? 1. And again, as the maximum allowed limit is 2, so this is also acceptable. Now if I leave the value like this as 1200.0, here before the decimal point you have in total 4 digits, that is 1200 comprises of 4 digits, and since the precision has the value 8, that means the maximum allowed limit is 8, and that's why before the decimal having 4 digits with the value 1200 is acceptable. And after the decimal you have 1 digit, that is 0, and again for the scale, since the maximum allowed limit is 2, so this is also acceptable. So in a way, the value 1200.0 is acceptable value for the column dcost. Now let me again remove this. Now let's come to the fourth column for this stable device, which is dprofit, and its data type is integer having the size as 3. Now columns having the integer data type shall accept only integer values, that is, the values which are defined as integers shall not contain any decimals. So just supply an integer value for the column dprofit. So let me supply the value as 125. Now is this an acceptable value for the column dprofit? Yes, it is, because the total number of digits for this value is 3. Okay, and since the maximum allowed limit is 3, so this is acceptable. Now if you put one more digit, say 4, now this will not be acceptable, because the total number of digits for this value now comes to 4, whereas the maximum allowed limit is only 3. So this exceeds the maximum allowed limit. So make sure to provide the total number of digits for a value of a column less than or equal to the maximum set limit as defined for a data type. So now if you reduce one more character, the total number of digits comes to 2 for this value, and since this is less than the maximum set limit, so this will be again an acceptable value for the column dprofit. So I hope you understood the concept of the size of a data type. You cannot put simply any values into the table. The values that you will put for the columns inside a table has to abide by the rules of the size that has been specified for the data types. So just simply do not put values for the columns in a table. Before that, consider the size of the data types that has been associated with the data type for placing the values for the columns in a table. Now let me remove this. This was just for you to understand. Now just after you have added the columns for a table, then at the end you close this table with a closing brace. That is, you close the body of the table with a closing brace and end it with a semicolon like this. Now this command creates this following table as shown in this figure, and initially this table will contain no data. That is, this table will not be populated with any data. It will be totally blanked. So whenever you create a new table, it will be a blank table showing only the column names, and that blank table will not show any values for the columns. Now if you wish to populate this table device with values for the columns, you should use the insert into command. Now let me explain you how to insert records into a table. The purpose of a table is to store data. Once a table has been created, the insert into statement can be used to populate the data inside this. Here is the syntax of using the insert statement. It starts with the keyword insert into, then you have to specify the name of the table. Okay, as the name of the table that we have created was device, so in order to populate this table device with values, you have to write the insert into statement as insert into device. Then the next part is that you have to supply the column names. Now see, this part which is represented inside the big bracket is an optional part. If you desire to show the column names, you can do that, or if you wish to omit that part, you can even omit this part, as this is an optional part. That means if you want, you can put these columns DID, DNAME, DCost, DProfit out here in this column list if you want to, or if you do not want to put these column names, that is also okay, because this part is an optional part. Okay, now just after writing insert into, then the table name as device, come to the next line, write the keyword values, then within bracket you have to put all the values for the columns. Now here the val1 will represent the value for the first column in the table, which is DID. That the value for val1 will come over here. Similarly, the val2 will represent the value for the second column of the table, that is DNAME, and it will be shown here. And in the same way, since this table have only two more columns, so there will be two more values, that is val3 and val4, and val3 will be shown here under the dcost column, and val4 will be shown here under the dprofit column. Now in case if you wish to include this optional part, then col1 will represent the column DID. Okay, col2 will represent the value DNAME, and since there are two more columns, so the next one will be call3, and the last one will be call4, where call3 will represent the value dcost and call4 will represent the value dprofit. So this optional part, that is call1, call2, call3, call4, this represents the columns for this table device, that is did for call1, dname for call2, dcost for call3, and dprofit for call4. And this part, that is the values part, comprising of val1, val2, val3, and val4, shall hold the values for these columns. So val1 will represent the value for the first column did, val2 will represent the value for the second column dname, val3 will represent the value for the third column, which is dcost, and val4 will represent the value for the fourth column dprofit for this table device. But as of now, this table device is not populated with any data. This is because this has been newly created, and when it's newly created, the data is entirely blank for the table. Now, using this syntax of the insert statement, I will now show you how to insert a particular record into the table using an example. Now consider this insert into statement for inserting the values d_001 into the table named device. Now see, this value d_001 is for the column name did, and since the column name did has been declared with varchar as the data type, so for values with varchar as the data type, they should be enclosed within quotations, and that's why the value d_001 has been enclosed within quotation. Similarly, the second value speaker is for the column name dname. Okay, and again this value speaker is within quotation. This is because even the column specified by the name dname is associated with the varchar data type, and as I have already told that for varchar data types, the values should be enclosed within quotations. And so here the value speaker is enclosed within quotation. Now see the third value, that is 1200.00. This value is for the column dcost, and it's not enclosed within quotation. This is because the data type for the column dcost is decimal. Since decimal is a data type which is numeric in nature, so for assigning numeric values, we should not enclose it within quotations. And the fourth value, which is 50, is for the column dprofit. Even this value is not enclosed within quotations because the data type for the column dprofit is integer. Okay, this is also a numeric in nature. That's why for numeric values, as I have already told, they should not be enclosed within quotations, and so the value 50 is not enclosed within quotations. So keep in mind that for any data type that is numeric in nature, its values should not be enclosed within quotations. But for the data types which are non-numeric in nature, their values should be enclosed within quotations. Now in this case, for the table name device, as the data types decimal and integer are numeric in nature, so the values for their columns should not be enclosed within quotations. And for the varchar data type, that is for the columns did with varchar 6 and for the column dname with varchar 10 of the table name device, the values for these two columns, that is did and dname, since their data type is varchar, it is non-numeric in nature, and that's why their values should be enclosed within quotations. That's why you see that the non-numeric values are represented using quotations or enclosed within quotations, and the numeric values are not enclosed within quotations. And just after inserting these values, end the insert statement with a semicolon. And once this statement gets executed, you will see that the table name device, which was initially empty, now contains the data d_0014 did, speaker for dname, 1200.00 for dcost, and 50 for dprofit. And this is how you insert values into a table. So I hope all of you have understood, and that's all for today.